Welcome back to the Astroimaging channel, everyone. Adam is sick today, so he won't be on, and we'll be having another open session. So go ahead and start asking your questions through our website's chat system. Just so everyone knows, we don't monitor the chat on the YouTube channel anymore, so definitely go to the astroimagingchannel.com. We have a chat system through there that we can use, and we can capture those. We don't have an image of the week this week, since both Adam and Josh are out. We'll get back to that next week when Adam is back. So I've got but before we get to the questions, let's go ahead and touch on a couple topics here. So one of the new things that I've seen happening is there's a new script on PixInsight called the local fuzzy histogram hyperbolization. That one looks to be like a very interesting, not exactly structure enhancement, but histogram enhancement script. I haven't played with it at all yet, so I can't really present anything on it, but looks like it's a very interesting way to enhance structure, particularly kind of faint structure in the background, it looks like. So definitely check that out. I'm not sure if anyone in the room has used that yet or not. All right, so let's, I know, has anyone else seen anything new that's come up that you're interested in before we get to some of the questions? No? All right, so I'll go ahead and jump right in. So the first question is from Glenn. He's asking, I still don't understand matching the pixel size to the telescope power. So when we're talking about matching pixel size, there's a couple aspects you need to consider. We don't really consider telescope power. We just consider image scale and field of view when we're pairing a camera with a telescope. There's a couple calculators out there that will show you. There's a nice online one called, I think, 12D strings. Yeah, so 12dstrings.me.uk. And I'm not sure if I can post this in the chat, but I'll try that. I can. It's a nice little field of view calculator that also tells you your pixel size. And sorry, your image size and your image scale, right? The image scale is kind of what we use as a metric for determining how well you were sampled. So the general rule of thumb is you want to be 1/3 approximately of your local seeing on average. So for example, in my area, that's anywhere from 2 to 3. So I want to be somewhere below, it says 2 to 3 arc seconds. I want to be somewhere below that in terms of my image scale. So I want to be 1 or below arc seconds per pixel for my sampling. So if you go to that calculator and you put in your telescope aperture, your focal length, put in the pixel size for your camera, how many pixels across and width and height it is, it will tell you your resolution in arc seconds per pixel, what your total field of view is, things like this. You can use that to both gauge how large of an object you can cover, whether you're going to cover a massive star-forming region in our galaxy or whether you're just going to cover a small planetary nebula, and at what resolution you will do that. So those are just some rules of thumb. You can get more in depth than that, but Glenn, let me know if that answers your question or not. Alex, Eric, Sean, you got anything to add to that? Oh, Togo's into it too.
No, we generally use the 2-for-1. That is, we want our scene, a resolution to be about half of our scene conditions. The other thing to consider if you're undersampling, in most cases, not all, it probably doesn't make any difference. That's the only thing I'd have to add.
Okay.
Yeah, I I'd like to say a couple things here. One is we've covered this in several places. I know that I did a presentation called Sensor Sense. So if you Google Sensor Sense, I think you'll find a number of slides there about how to match your telescope tube to your camera. But I think that it's important to note that your cameras are expensive. They cost, you know, $2,000 to $5,000 and more, and you're not going to change them that much. You're going to buy a camera and generally going to keep it for 3, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is going to be. Tubes, you're going to change a lot, stuff like, and your seeing conditions are going to change a lot. And if you are keying your decisions about which camera and telescope to buy under XYZ seeing conditions, nearly all that's going to change. So you can only get so picky about all of that. You know what I mean? You can only fuss so much. Things are going to change. So don't make it quite as important as we sometimes say. It is one of the things we like to discuss. And I bought cameras based on their pixel size. I recently had to buy a new camera because the camera that I had been using was simply using pixels that were too small, and I wanted bigger pixels. And bigger pixels generally can gather light more efficiently and stuff like that. And they fill up a screen much bigger. They overfill a screen much bigger. So, having told you not to worry so much about matching your pixel size, arc second coverage, I went and bought myself a new camera just to do just that. But I understand that, you know, considering that you can bin your images, for instance, you can all of a sudden make bigger pixels. You can quadruple the size of your pixels. So don't fuss it too much. I see a lot of angst out there sometimes, people worrying if they got just the ideal match. And I don't think there is any such thing as an ideal perfect match. Just go for what you can reasonably get. I think more important is to kind of get as wide a field or biggest chip as you can, and deal with the rest of it as you can. If you've got the money and you can buy all sorts of cameras and match each camera to each scope to each viewing condition, go ahead and do it. But don't fuss it too much.
Yeah, it's definitely right. You know, when I say that, you know, my average seeing conditions are 2 to 3, they certainly vary well above that and sometimes below that. You know, I tried to tune a system so that, you know, on some of those better days, I can still achieve reasonable resolution. But there are, like Alex said, you can bin to get larger pixels, which you know, is going to increase your image scale. So on the days when your seeing is not as good, you want to go after a nice nebulous target and you're not worried about resolution that much, you can do that. And on the days when it's better, then you could really sample. You can dither and drizzle that data so that you can regain some additional resolution. So you can do it both ways. You know, generally, what I would suggest is you try to pick something that's a good happy medium, and then, you know, work with what you get with your data. Don't try to be too picky about it, and just try to average it out. Anyone else want to comment on that one? When did we answer your question?
Yeah, I think people make too much of a big deal about image scale and trying to get it perfect. I mean, I've seen beautiful images with an FSQ and an 11,000 chip, which is probably at 4 or 5 arc seconds per pixel. But I've seen beautiful images come out of that pair. So I think it's just overrated. And especially for a beginner, somebody should shoot for a low resolution system than a high resolution system.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be much easier for you to work with. You know, with bigger pixels, you're going to get more light, regardless of the optical system you hook it up to. So it definitely makes things easier starting out.
Okay, David, you're leading the questioning, picking the questions.
Yeah, so I was going through there. I've been writing them down as much as I can as I go along. The next one I have is from Jeremy. When trying to get more star color, should I use shorter exposures or more total exposure time? Anyone want to field that one?
I can take that.
All right.
What you need to do is go over to something like Photoshop and call up a picture of an astrophoto and click on a star and check the readings from the information window about what that star says. If the star says 180 for red, 180 for green, and 240 for blue, then that star is going to look kind of blue more than anything else. If it says 180, 180, 180, it's going to look white because all three of the color values are the same. And when you mix the R, G, and B together in equal volume, you'll get a white. Well, let's take that where it was 180, 180, 240, and we expose a little more, it becomes, well, let's say 195, 195, 255. Well, 255 is as high as it can go in that kind of a mode. And so it can't go any higher. It'll still look blue, you notice, because blue is still stronger than the red or the green. So it'll still look blue. Everything's fine. Let's bump it up another 50 or 60 or whatever it takes to get to maximum exposure. The longer exposure then gets us a 255 for red, a 255 for green, and blue doesn't go to 3 something. It doesn't go to 300 because it can't go to 300. 255 is as big as it can get. And so the balance is such now that it is equal, 255, 255, 255 right across the board. So you're going to have white stars. All that is to say that you have to keep the exposure under a certain level. The higher you run the exposure, the more chance you have of running all three of those registers, red, green, and blue, into the 255 range. And when I say 255, that's the 8-bit expression that you see in Photoshop of the intensity of that particular color level in your star. Okay, having said that, if you want to get the color in your stars, you have to keep it below, you have to keep the exposure relatively low. Of course, when do you need to stop? You need to stop at about the time that one of those registers, red, green, or blue, is up near 250 or so. Try not to push it all the way to 255 because when it might be going past 255 and you don't know it. So if you can get that the star to be on its brightest of the 3 color channels, 250 or so, then you know that the other 2 are proportionally where they belong. How's that for an answer?
I think that's pretty good, Alex.
Okay.
So I'll let's see if we can simplify it just a little bit more. But what Alex is talking about is if you expose too long, the stars will all clip all color channels and you'll lose the information. So from a general perspective, if you want better star color, you need to expose short enough that none of your stars are clipped across all different color channels. Pretty straightforward. There's more complex ways to deal with this as well by taking multiple different lengths of exposures. But from a simple perspective, just if you want more star color, just make sure to expose short enough to not clip the stars. All right, so there's some more questions about binning. This kind of gets back to the first question about pixel size. And we talked a little bit about binning. Bias was asking, you know, for example, when is it better to do it or versus not? George is asking to bin or not to bin. A couple questions coming up on binning. It's really about the same discussion we were having with image scale, right? So if you have a telescope camera combination that is, you know, at a particular image scale, let's say it's at 1 arcsecond per pixel, and you have a pretty poor night, your seeing is not great, and you're going to go after a nice diffuse nebula that doesn't have a lot of structure in it, then you can bin your image, and that means that each pixel now, if this is assuming you have a monochrome CCD, each pixel is now combined with 3 other of its adjacent pixels. So you have a group of 4 that act as 1 pixel. Most CCD cameras allow the binned group to have a larger dynamic range that's fully captured by the readout sensor portion, so that you get a larger dynamic range for that 1 pixel, and you get 4 times the area of light gathered. So it's just like having a camera with a bigger pixel. It's not 100%, but it's pretty close. So it allows you to gather more light faster. So if you're taking, say, HA data of a nice nebulous region, it's kind of not the best seeing out or something like that, or maybe HA is not the best because we get a lot of detail out of HA, but say O3 or S2, then you could bin your data and you would be able to cut your exposures back to a shorter exposure time. The consequences, you have, a quarter the number of pixels in that image at the end, right? So you've cut back the number of pixels you have available because you've grouped 4 pixels into 1 effective pixel. It'll still cover the same field of view, but you'll have less resolution overall. That's really the trade-off with binning. I don't know. Anyone else want to add something?
Well, there's another reason to bin, and that is if you're doing narrowband, which a lot of us are doing because we live in light-coated areas, then most of the emission nebulas are strong in HA and relatively weak in sulfur and oxygen. So in order to get a structure out of sulfur and oxygen, usually you can bin 2 your images, get some structure, which you can then upscale in order to construct your final, say, Hubble palette images, which again, a lot of us do. So that's another reason to bin. Just bringing out more information in very weak emitting narrowband structures.
So Eric, when you do that, I assume that you cut back the exposure time in the binned data that you're doing so that you get more frames that way and you get a higher signal to noise ratio faster is your goal, right?
Yeah, generally, for example, if I'm doing 15-minute exposures for HA, then I'll probably do 10-minute exposures bin 2 for sulfur and oxygen. And you're right, you pile up more, you get a little better SNR. And then if you then combine it with tone mapping, you're not really concerned about the resolution of sulfur and oxygen. You just need some structure in order to get that color tone map, the starless tone map. That actually gets into another subject. But generally speaking, except for maybe 2 or 3 nebulas like the Rosette, for example, or the Heart Nebula, I will bin sulfur and oxygen, bin to it.
I think it's also important to realize, some people complain about losing resolution, and yeah, you do lose resolution. There's no question about it. What used to be defined by X number of arc seconds per pixel is now 4 times that. So yeah, you're 4 times the arc seconds per pixel when you bin 2 by 2. But go back to the fact that most of the time you are not showing your pictures at full resolution anyway. Your computer screen can't handle nearly the number of pixels that your sensor can put out. And as a result, most of us, unless we're cropping the image substantially, are showing at a reduced, we're reducing the number of pixels that we show on our screen when we do that. So you're really not missing all that much resolution because you're not showing it up that high anyway. If you're printing your images and a few other things, yeah, you probably don't want to lose that stuff, some of that resolution. But it's okay to bin if you're just going to be showing it on a computer screen, and that's about it.
Well, there's probably one more issue here. If you're doing an LRGB image, the resolution comes from your luminosity image. Mm-hmm. So if you want to quickly gather your RGB image, you can bin that, and it'll take much shorter period of time. And you really won't lose anything in luminosity, since your luminosity comes from your L filter, not from your RGB. So you can cheat a little bit on the RGB by generating your color background with stars, and then use the detail from the luminosity. So you can speed up your capture a little bit. Now, I generally don't do that, but if I find I'm pressed a little bit for time, then I will sometimes bin RGB, as long as I have good data for luminosity.
I've also used 3x3 binning on narrowband data at star parties on occasion to get a very high signal very quickly on the narrowband data. And, you know, I'd rotate through HAS 203 on a nice bright target so that they could actually see the differences between the different spectra they were looking at. Makes another nice useful way. It's very much like trying to frame and focus and get an idea of where the target's at and things like that, but another good use for binning.
Well, actually, you know, that's a good point. When I do setup on a narrowband target, in order to get things framed properly,
yeah,
I always use binning.
Yeah.
Just to bring it up quickly, so I'm not spending 5 minutes to make sure I'm in the right position. So that's a good idea.
All right. So we've hit binning pretty hard. I think, Eric, you answered a question Jeff had later about do you use the binned narrowband images as detail or just for color? And I think in your case, you're doing HA at 1x1 and then S2 and O3 binned. And then you're doing tone mapping, so it doesn't really matter, right?
I'm sorry, yes, that's absolutely correct.
Yeah.
You probably should mention that a tone map is basically a color background for, say, a Hubble palette image without any stars. So the detail is not as important, and again, comes out with generally the HA image acting as a luminosity on top of the color or tone map.
Right. Okay, so let's see. Someone asks, how can you find out the seeing on a particular night? That's kind of a tricky question, actually. You know, if you've got a small little 80mm telescope and you've got a camera with bigger pixels, you're never going to truly see what the seeing is like in your area. You can functionally determine it for your setup by just seeing what the lowest full with half maximum you get in any of your subs is. But you'll be limited by your image scale and aperture. The modelers out there, like you see in Clear Sky Clock and I don't know, some of the other weather systems that predict what seeing is going to be like, are very iffy. Those are simulations, and I found them to be very, very wrong on a lot of the time on how good the seeing actually is.
Besides that, they don't actually give you a numerical value of what you're seeing is going to be, do they?
So there's one called Meteo Blue that does. It actually will represent it in arc seconds, what the seeing is in arc seconds, but at least 50% of the time, probably more, it's pretty far off. So, you know, take it with a very big grain of salt. The only real way you could be certain is if you're actually using a true seeing monitor, or if you have a very large aperture instrument with a very small image scale and you're very accurately measuring the stars. So that you can actually see what the profile looks like and get a good measurement off of it with some very short exposure, so you're not dealing with tracking or anything else.
Another way I found out, I mean, this is if you have a diffraction limited system and then your seeing is your limit, usually your focus FWHM matches seeing. I mean, if everything else is correct, you know, if your tracking is correct, you don't have curvature or anything like optical problems. I can look at my FWHM numbers and then look at the seeing, and they're the same.
Yes, so yes, you've got a true diffraction limited system where the seeing is worse than whatever diffraction limit you have in your telescope camera setup. Yeah, you'll definitely see what the seeing actually is with that setup. Tolga, when you're doing that, are you looking at the guide results, and are you using off-axis or on-axis systems?
No, in this particular case, I wasn't guiding, but you could just do a 2-second exposure and look at the overall FWHM of your overall image. So it's not guiding.
Okay. Next question was, Jeff was asking, if we want to talk color, what options does a colorblind guy have to achieve appropriate color when I can't just ask somebody? That's a very interesting question.
You got to go down a couple of questions further, and who was it? Jeff says, "Hey, I can see my own stuff just fine. I'm worried about when I show it off to other people." I don't quite understand that follow-up. Meaning, if you can see it, that it's fine with you, why do you think it wouldn't be fine for everybody else?
If he is colorblind,
yeah,
he's seeing a different spectrum. He's not seeing reds the same way. He's not seeing blues the same way.
Yeah. So what he sees.
If you want to get someone with a real opinion about this, you should talk to Chris Hendren out at OPT, who is probably one of their premier techies, and he's colorblind. And he does lots of imaging. I've talked to him about that. There's no good answer, and everyone seems to be very sensitive about the idea. You're kind of stuck unless you have a friend who can chime in and say, your reds are a little flat here.
The best suggestion I can make is do a couple images, make them the way you like, and then compare with a few of your friends that are not colorblind, and if they say it's too red, it's too green, it's too blue, or whatever, and you tone it back a little bit and then show it to them again, they like it, then I would just use that same transform every time you process an image, right? So every time you go through, you would process it how you like it, and then you would use the same transform of red reduction or something like that every time you do it.
And if you're in Photoshop, you could always use the color picker just to see how much red, green, and blue is in something that you might consider red, green, or blue.
Right.
And maybe that could be a standard in the same way. I think you're probably thinking more PixInsight, but for the Photoshop people, that might be useful. Although it seems to be kind of complex to really get it right without being able to see the color.
Yeah, I mean, there are color calibration tools out there, like the color tools in PixInsight. I don't know about color calibration specifically in Photoshop. There's a whole bunch of tools for adjusting color, but I don't know what you would use for just doing an automatic balance. Do you know anything about doing that, Eric?
No, I'm just saying, when you get the image that you like, you could go in and say, is this red? Look at your color picker and see whether red, and you can have an idea whether
your color picker acts as one of those Kodak color charts.
So you can see what red really is according to Photoshop.
Right.
I like Eric's answer, though. We really don't have an answer.
Yes, that's true. The only other suggestion I'll make is if you're using PixInsight, I would use the photometric color calibration tool, which uses known stars as a known reference to give you a color calibrated image that works on broadband data. So if you're doing narrowband, it's not going to be helpful for you. But if you're doing broadband images, it will get your image in a perceptually color neutral format, you know, from the get-go. But yeah, there's no hard fast answer for that, unfortunately. All right, the next one I had, Jeff was asking, in the past we've had presentations where presentation material was applied under the corner of the video. Just where can I find those presentations? That's a good question. Is that on the YouTube channel that you're asking about that, Jeff? Or was that through the Google Hangouts, you know, the event notification?
Yeah, you're just going to have to type that answer in down there, I guess.
So we'll come back.
I couldn't understand what we were talking about, what we're asking about in the first place.
I think he's asking about, you know, presentation material when we do a full presentation, and someone has posted information about, you know, follow this link and I have some data or something like that, but I'm not certain.
Well, why would that be under the video?
So Jeff responded saying, no, it was here. I forget which presentation was running. There was a slide deck under the corner of the video. I'm not sure what that is, Jeff. We'll have to ask Adam.
Jeff, why don't you do some research and figure out who was the presenter that night, and we can look at it and see. Adam posted something underneath the. Is he posting it over in the chat area? Is that what you're talking about? I think the PhD guy did one. Okay, we'll have to look. I still don't understand what the question is, so sorry.
I think it is data on the video page. Jeff, was this on YouTube where you were seeing it? Seeing the link?
Jeff's fingers are getting tired.
Yeah, he's asking a lot of good questions though. So
no, I don't mind the questions. I mean, we keep asking him, and he feels like he's got to answer real quick and all that.
On the astroimaging channel, yeah, we'll have to ask Adam about that one. I'm not familiar with what he's done there.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, the next one I captured was from Jeremy. I was wondering if having more subs would bring the dynamic range back to allow more color. When I have a decent off the left histogram, my stars come out muted sometimes. Not always, but it makes processing a bit more difficult. Is it worth shooting some shorter subs for star color, or can I take more subs at the same length to get the color back? I'll field this one to start, at least. So taking more subs does, it's not going to increase the dynamic range, but it will regain some signal to noise ratio. So if you take shorter subs to make sure that the stars do not clip so you get more star color, then you will eventually, well, within limits anyway, regain the signal to noise ratio you would have gotten if you'd taken longer exposures. There are limits on that, but for the most part, it works pretty well, provided you're just not going too short and your signal is not completely buried in the read noise of the sensor. So there are limits to how far you can go, but to a certain extent, yes, that's true. The other way you can deal with this is to take multiple different exposure levels, where you take some very long exposures to really bring up the signal to noise ratio of the fainter areas, and then take shorter exposures to make sure that the star peaks and the brighter cores of galaxies or nebulae are well exposed in those exposures. And then you can combine them in an HDR to truly expand the dynamic range of the system, so you can get both the star color and the better signal to noise ratio on the background. Anyone else want to?
I want to propose that there's a definition of dynamic range that is how much signal is above the noise. If you've taken just one sub, for instance, there's going to be a lot of noise in that. When you've combined 10 subs or 20 subs or 50 subs, there's going to be progressively less noise the more subs you take. When you've got less noise, you can process a lot harder, and you can make more distinctions between the various levels of what you've got because you've got less noise to deal with. And in that sense, you have more dynamic range because you can process everything a little bit harder and pull things up higher and lower without getting into the noise. So at any rate, it's always better to have, well, it's always better to have more subs. Whether it's effectively better because you're, of a law of diminishing returns is another question. But having more subs will get you more less noisy data, and less noisy data can give you more to process.
Good point, Alex. What you're really fighting is not the dynamic range of a single sub, but the dynamic range of a stack. And adding more frames into it definitely increases the dynamic range of the stack. It doesn't change the overall signal level. You're just reducing the noise so that you can bring more out of it. Yeah. Okay. I think I lost track of questions about at that point, and there have been quite a few.
For those of you who are out there, what we're trying to do is both listen to the answers, answer the questions, and read the future questions coming up to get ready for them. And it's a little bit discombobulating.
Yes. So let's see.
There was a question about linearity.
I'd like to start with that one if I could.
Okay.
First, I have to go find out. I got to go to a different program. Oops, that's not the program I wanted. I have to share a screen. Share. Okay, you're seeing my whole screen now. And let's pop up this. Are you now seeing my PowerPoint screen?
Yep, we're seeing.
Yes.
Okay. If you're down in the 0 point down here, no exposure, no pixel value, okay, no light intensity. And then every step that you increase light intensity, there's a direct linear response. See, it's a line, therefore it's linear. That every increase in light gives you some predictable increase in pixel value. So that's linear. All right. And you can keep doing that until your pixel reaches saturation. All right. So when you're taking a picture, this is saturation, and that's as much as you can go. And your light intensity may be continuing to go up, but that saturate, you're not getting any more value out of it. Now, this is with an anti-blooming gate. If you have a blooming gate, however, as it increases and it keeps increasing, well, at some point, it changes the way it's increasing. It's not increasing as quickly anymore up here. All right. And then finally, it too gets to a saturation point where it won't increase anymore. You've reached as many, you've tossed as many photons into this well as you can get. This is all incidentally from a presentation that you can find on the astroimaging channel called Sensor Sense. I referred to it earlier. So this is linear. This is no longer linear. Okay, so that's what linear means. It just means that for every one thing you put in, you get an equivalent thing out. It's not necessarily a 1-to-1. It may be a 2-to-1 or a 3-to-1 or a 4-to-1. But at some point, it stops being that ratio. Okay, so that's what linearity is. And the fact that this is about blooming gates or anti-blooming gates, don't worry about that. The question is, what's linear mean? It means that it's a 1-to-1 or a 2-to-1 but a set relationship to 1 every time you go try to do something with it. Okay, let me get out of there. And then was the question strictly about what, where's that question again? What's the question? Okay. Now, that same sense is used when you're using curves in Photoshop or in PixInsight or anything. You actually take, for a given intensity, with a linear thing, every intensity is matched in the output. With a non-linear thing where you've stretched something, you stop the screen share. When you're non-linear anymore, you've made the brights brighter than they should be and the darks dimmer than they should be and things like that. Okay, that's my first pass at it. Somebody else want to take it?
When I try to describe this, go back to the water and water buckets example. A linear sensor is like filling a 5-gallon water bucket with a hose. It will just fill all the way to the top and then start spilling. And a sensor with anti-blooming gate has small holes on the top quarter of the bucket. It will fill up to those holes and it'll start leaking. So you won't fill the top quarter of the bucket as fast as you did the first 3/4 of the bucket. Try to make an analogy. I don't know. Sometimes it helps to visualize it.
Yeah.
And the advantage of that is, if you're doing scientific imaging, you don't want a non-linear camera for everything you want. If you get a photon, 5 photons, 100 photons, you want to convert that to a direct number. In pretty picture photography, we don't care about that. We want our stars to look pretty, and we don't want our bucket to overflow and look like a mess. So we go for anti-blooming gate sensors.
And if Mars is asking what linearity is, linearity simply means a one-to-one relationship between input and output in our hobby. That's what linearity means. And it is used not just in the example I gave you of sensors, but it's also used in curves and in various other places when we're image processing, where sometimes we want the brighter parts of the image to come out more bright than they normally would. We want the dimmer parts to stay dimmer than they normally would be. And so we have to have different curves. And so it's no longer linear. Okay? That's what linearity is about.
Yeah, and I'll only add one tiny little point to this, that what we are looking for, the linearity between, is the number of photons arriving at the sensor and the count, the ADU that we're getting out of the sensor. That's what needs to be linear for a sensor.
Well, for a scientific sensor, David, for a pretty picture sensor, maybe not so much.
That's true. Although pretty much all the CCDs you see out there, they're clipped to the linear range anyway. They could actually be used for science just as well as.
Yes. If you know, when we say take flats so that it stays in the linear range, we just mean take it such that you never get to the point on my example here where you never get up to this point. You never get up to this point here. Okay, see, this is a non-linear curve because it's a curve, not a line. It's linear up to here. And so you want to be sure that your flats that you're taking are down in the linear range. That means below whatever point this is. And this point in a modern anti-blooming gate sensor is probably up in the 40s or 50,000s. You know, so it can get up there pretty high before it goes non-linear. That's why we say keep your ADUs down to about 30,000. But again, I don't know whether the question was simply one of what is linearity, or what is a linear sensor versus what is a non-linear image versus a curved, one with curves in it. I don't know what the question was. The concept of linearity itself is that there is a line, a X-to-1 relationship that is always predictable and it's always there. Okay? Where were we?
Right. So discussing linearity, Eric, Jeff was asking about, you mentioned Chris someone. I think it was related to the color blindness question. Could you say the full name again?
Chris Hendren, he is in charge of their professional services at OPT.
Okay.
But again, I wouldn't necessarily bother Chris. He's actually a bit sensitive about that issue.
Unless you're a school or government service wanting to buy telescopes, then go ahead and bother Chris.
Yes.
All right, let's see. Next one I saw was from Isaac relating to Astro software licensing.
Boy, that thread got locked. What's it doing here?
I was going to say, I'm not sure that's one we want to cover here.
I'll cover it. I don't mind covering it.
Cover it, Alex.
I've had, look, I bought a car in 2008, and it was a real nice car. They've upgraded it since then. I didn't have to pay anything for those upgrades, or they've come out with a new model of that car. And I have been invited to purchase the new model of that car. They are under no obligation whatsoever to keep updating my old car just because they're putting out a new car. I don't understand, Isaac, where, and the guys on SGP forum, there, or on the forum that were talking about this, and that I think that's where the question's coming from. Now they've got a perfect right to upgrade everything, build, put a new model out there and all that other stuff. If they haven't told you otherwise, and they all of a sudden discontinued 2.6, version 2.6.024, whatever it is, then you might have a gripe. But they never said that they would do that. I'm allowed to drive my old 2008 car wherever I want, whenever I want, however I want, even though there are 2017 and 2018 cars out there right now. Those that call the SGP change a subscription model, no. In a subscription model, when you stop paying your subscription, you can't use the product anymore. That's not going to happen. You can still continue to use the product. They just aren't going to bother to update it for you to the new whatever it is. That's all. So that's my thought on it.
I completely agree. I know Jared and the guys from SGP partially, right? I meet with them at a couple star parties, and they live nearby, and I talk to them every now and then. But I fully understand why they're making this change, and completely agree with them doing so. I mean, I think they're trying to do right by everyone. I think their goal is to make it so that, it's fair in terms of if you choose to upgrade, and completely fair if you choose not to, right? It's, you've got your software, it's not going to be turned off or anything like that. So I completely agree with that. I know other software providers do, similar things. Software Bisque, you can buy their software and you can upgrade it, with a yearly service fee if you choose to, but you don't have to, and you can keep using your software, right? So that's something you should know going in. PI, PixInsight, is theoretically the same model, although I think they've pretty much stomped on the fact that they're going to come out with a 2.0 version anytime soon, so that's not likely to happen for quite some time. But is it any worse than a subscription model or better than a subscription model? I think it just depends on who you are and what your preferences are.
And I also would like to say that if SGP was $300 right now, it would still be a steal. It would still be a good deal.
Yeah.
Come on, don't give them any ideas.
Yeah.
No, I'm just saying, compared to what else is out there, if SGP came out, it was $300. That's a good deal for all it does.
I saw a presentation on the Astro Imaging channel once upon a time, a long time ago, when we were just babies, and it was about automating your rig. And I put a chart in there that said what the other ones cost. and SGP is approximately 1/6 to 1/15 of what it costs you to run these other programs that do pretty much the same thing.
Yeah. Ken and Jared are definitely not in it for the money, and they're not just trying to steal from you to make this stuff work, right? So they're trying to put out something that works for everyone, works for themselves, and is good for the community, right?
Isaac, it's not as if they told you one thing and they're doing another. They said, hey, you buy this software and you're entitled to any updates as long as, you know, we stay in the same release level. And they said that, and they're doing that. And it's not as if the day they release 3.0, your 2.6 is no longer going to be working. Now, if we were to buy into a subscription model over on Adobe, from what I understand, you could no longer use it. I can still use my CS6 that I use regularly, you know, but because I've never gone to the subscription model. So I don't understand where that whole thing came from in Cloudy Nights. And I'm glad it finally got stopped. It doesn't belong there, and there's no way you can adequately defend yourself in that particular forum. So,
yeah.
Have you
Right,
typed in anything else, Isaac? Let's see what Isaac's got down later. Nope, Isaac hasn't said anything lately. Hi, Isaac.
Yeah, he says when 2x was purchased, this was not known. 2.x was purchased. This was not known. I am sure that's true, but my understanding from Jared when I talked to him in October was that they were trying to do some sort of prorated system.
Yeah.
So that, you know, you're not having to pay the full amount if you choose to move to the 3.0 release.
Well, I'll tell you what, I couldn't renew my what is it? My Windows 2007 that I have on this I had on this computer in the beginning when Office 2015 came out. I couldn't renew it to Office 2015. It wouldn't do it. It wouldn't go. So I still don't, you know, it's been said.
Yeah. All right. So the next one I saw was relating to how does one deal with switching filters? I mean, a wheel is nice, but where do your narrowband filters go? Do they even make 7-position 2-inch wheels? They do make 7-position 2-inch wheels. They make, I think, 10-position, you know.
I've got a 9.
Yeah, you know. I've seen some very, very large wheels out there for some very large filters.
Yeah, I use the 7 Starlight Express 7. It's got 1.25 and 2-inch carousels.
Yeah, so mine is not a 2-inch. I've got a QSI with the built-in wheel, so it's an 8-position wheel, but it's only 1.25 inches. But yeah, that way I have LRGB, you know, HAS 203, and then I've got an extra slot open. Right.
Jeff, I had an early 583 from QSI before they came out with the 8-position filter wheel. So I only could put 5 in. So what I did was I put the LRGB in the first 4 slots, and then I put hydrogen alpha in. And because that's by far the most common pictures you're going to be taking. And then when I take it out to the desert where I'm going to be taking LRGB, I would just open up the camera, unscrew 2 of the filters and unscrew the O3 and the S2 and replace them with the green and the blue. And then when I came home, I'd swap it back for narrowband use by by just swapping it back. That change operation, it takes 5 to 10 minutes at the most. And yeah, it's kind of annoying to have to do it, but it really is not that big a deal to change position in the filter wheels. I would suggest that most people will go, if they've got 5 positions in their filter wheels, they will take the LRGB and then the hydrogen alpha. If they get 7, they'll put the other 2 narrow bands in. If they get to 8 and 9, well, in the camera I need one of them for a black filter to take darks with, and One of my buddies who's got the same 9-position filter wheel puts a minus V or something like that. What is it called to help measure, do some scientific measurements with it, or you just leave it blank or whatever you want to do. So it depends on, yeah, they make many position filter wheels. So that's that.
Yeah, I think my 8th slot is going to get filled with a near infrared filter at some point. Right. So, yeah, they're definitely out there. They're obviously more expensive. Weight can be an issue depending on your setup. So you need to have a equipment that can handle the weight and torque of a big old filter wheel hanging off of it, along with the camera and everything else.
I heard they caused a problem for the on-axis guider that we've been talking about lately too, because they get in the way.
The mechanically they stick out.
Mechanically, yeah.
Yeah.
They're big things. They're big suckers.
They're huge,
and they've got some torque. I'm just trying to install a system with that over the last couple of weeks, and I've got to make sure that all my set screws are tightened, all the filters or all the adapters and everything are right in place and all that other stuff. And I haven't quite worked it all out yet.
FLI has a great solution for that. They have a center line filter wheel where there are 2 small carousels side by side.
Yeah.
And one position overlaps. And so it's not all, one lump sided. The weight is distributed equally. But it's very expensive.
Yes.
Another thing some people do is they've got separate filter wheels that, the whole wheel comes out and you just slap a whole nother wheel in. But it's like, okay, at some point enough's enough.
Yeah. All right. The next question I had is dealing with the ASI 1600M Pro from CWO. I have 0 experience with that, David. I'm not sure if anyone else has used one in the room. Alex, you used one. Tolga, you're most likely to have.
Yeah, Tolga likes
one.
that stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I've used it, but I don't know about the new version.
Okay.
I had the first camera ever, the first beta camera. I did the testing on it. I put a report on Friday nights. I said that it's a good beginner camera. It's people have been producing very good images with it. But I don't have the latest and the greatest.
Okay.
The newest version.
Sean had posted a link, but I don't know, Sean, if that was for the Pro version or not.
That's for the first version.
Okay.
I have the new version, but I haven't shot with it yet.
Okay. So maybe we'll have a report coming up soon, David, and we can talk about that. Hint, hint, Sean.
My soul.
All right. The next thing I saw was Israel Gill was asking on Narrowband. I usually have doubts on how much stretch each color channel. I assume you're asking how much you want to stretch each color channel relative to each other or something like that. Any thoughts?
What does he mean by stretch? I mean, how do you balance the color channel?
I'm not sure. I think his English may not be the best, so it's not the best translation here, so it's hard to say exactly what he's asking.
If you just do a combination, you'll end up with a green image in most cases because HA is so much stronger than the other two. So generally, the first thing you'll do is go into the histogram and somewhat crudely just trying to balance all the 3 colors, which will bring you closer to, say, a Hubble palette image, the orange to the blue. And then it's a matter of tweaking that depending on what your sensibilities are to make it more or less orange or more or less blue. So you generally balance the histograms once you do the combination of SHO, sulfur, hydrogen, and oxygen.
Is this a good place to discuss linear fit?
No, you really don't want to do linear fit in this case. I'm sure there's a way to do it in PixInsight, but generally you simply do your your stretches, noise reduction in PixInsight, move it over to Photoshop, and then do your combinations and your histogram adjustments. I would definitely not do a linear fit back in PixInsight.
Yeah, linear fit is really designed to match the overall intensities in the frames, and the narrowband stuff doesn't necessarily match up 100%.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. It would if we were asking RGs and Bs, maybe, but not the narrowbands.
The RGB it can give you a quick starting place, and then you color balance from there, right? But narrowband is a little tricky that way. Like Eric said, you know, just doing your full processing per channel and then combining is a great way to do it, and then you just balance out the stretches with curves or something like that if you're using PixInsight after the fact.
If you want to have a very short tutorial on that, go to Bob Frankie's BF Astro, Frankie as in Yankee, and he lays that out pretty simply on how to balance your histogram and then how to make other color adjustments to come up with the Hubble palette image that we all know and love, or at least some of us love it. At least I love it.
It's very useful for understanding what's going on in the image.
Makes for pretty pictures too.
Yeah. So I got another one in here. David was asking, does linearity change over time? It's an interesting question. The characteristics of sensors do change over time. I've not seen any real change in the overall gain, which is how we measure the linearity, or the how the gain is set over time, and I've not seen any change in the linear response over the full dynamic range of the camera over the 4 or 5 years I've had my camera. And the one I had before that, the same was true. So there may be a shift in there, but my guess is it would be on pretty large time scales. I know, Alex, have you had any cameras that you've had for 10 years or so, and have you done any characterization on them?
No, I'm not that scientific. I process each image as it comes in, so all I know, I mean, I could go back and check probably at some time, but I haven't noticed any. I don't understand how linearity itself would change anyway, meaning that as it's getting more, I mean, is it less efficient in the bright? Is it less efficient in the higher ADU levels than it used to be compared to the lower ADU levels? I don't know what changing linearity would mean.
My best guess, I'll give you my best guess here, which is that over time, I would think that the sensitivity of the pixels could change. And since the gain is typically fixed in these CCD cameras, you may be exposing different parts of the nonlinear range that you weren't seeing before, because the gain is still the same, but now your sensitivity is different. So you effectively, on the picture you showed earlier for the ABG cameras, Alex, you got a curve and you have a line that is your full well depth, your 6400, 335 ADU, max ADU that you can get off a 16-bit sensor. Yeah, let me bring that over. So with the mark you have as linear range, the response of the sensor may shift a little bit, and where it crosses that line may be slightly different. So you may be up into the slightly more nonlinear range of it, potentially.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, if it were happening, we would have heard about it.
Yeah, my guess is it's on a multi-year scale, 10, 20 years, if at all, for something like that.
I do know, though, again, if we're talking about dynamic range, noise versus good, valuable signal, yes, your sensor through the years will degrade. It'll get more hot spots, cold spots, lines that have to be processed out. bad columns and rows. So yeah, all that stuff. All that stuff will happen through time.
Absolutely. I've certainly seen new hot pixels show up, and some glows actually, from dark thermal effects start to be more prominent over time in cameras. So those things certainly do occur on time scales we can observe.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. We've hit 9:30. We've got a couple more questions here. Let's see. The other two I've seen are Pam M is asking if someone could discuss drizzling, and Sean in the room is asking, does anyone?
I was just putting that out if anybody was doing it.
Yeah, asking about the notification system in SG Pro. David confirming that he would like to see that as well.
I've used it and stopped using it. I just as soon. I just didn't get enough out of it. It was a little buggy. It was giving me messages that didn't affect my life. So why do I need to know that you just finished focusing and a few other things? Just don't wake me up for that. So I never figured out how to use it. Maybe.
Yeah, I was looking to have it wake me up if a sequence aborted.
It what?
I only wanted to use it in case a sequence aborted and it would wake me up with a text or something.
Yeah, and another, it's one of those things that got killed off in the latest release on my phone, and I just never bothered to figure out how to get it back in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm always with my equipment, so I've never really found it useful because I'm there, right? So I've never really turned it on.
Let it rip.
And I'm monitoring with just looking at the monitor. I can look on I can look at the computer through my phone. What's that called?
Team Viewer?
Type VNC. I use Type VNC. Team Viewer, any of those kinds of things. You just look at what your computer screen's doing, which isn't the same thing as being awakened and being told to go look at your computer screen. But
well, I have a laptop that I keep by that I have Team Viewer, but there has been times lately where it's aborted and I'll wake up and look at the laptop and realize that it aborted 30 minutes after I went to sleep.
Yeah, that
be nice. Text, wake me up, an alarm, something.
Yeah. Just because I never got it to work doesn't mean it's not valuable. I didn't work that hard at getting it to work either.
I hear you.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some people that, maybe Adam is probably the best person to answer that, because I think he uses it, his setup runs pretty much remotely, so he may have more of a need for it than I do.
And he's asleep right now, so we could call him.
Yeah.
He went to sleep early because he was sick. So
yeah.
It was aborted, Adam. Get up.
All right. Pam's question about drizzling. That one.
Too big a question. Let's make a program out of it.
I was going to say that one. I think we want to just make a new program about it. I think we've discussed it before, but let's hit that one again.
Let's take a quick survey. We were talking. You certainly know that we've been doing open sessions for the last, I think, 3 sessions, and we will have a program next week, one way or the other. Tolga, maybe you can speak to that, or I'll speak to it. Either you've got somebody, or I'll do it next week. But we were looking. I was preparing one on flats, and I'm looking back through our shows because, haven't we done something on flats before? And we try not to repeat anything. And then I realized, it's virtually impossible not to repeat stuff eventually. And do you guys really mind if we like David did a show on such and so? Well, I want somebody else to do a show on such and so. And we'll get a different take, a different perspective on it. I noticed that what I was going to say about flats has already been said by 2 people. But we still get lots of questions about flats. So we're still going to do another one about flats and hope everybody can participate and add to it and have all that other stuff.
I mean, just type in a message over here on your message screen if you think that's a bad idea, a poopy idea, or what. Or a good idea, whatever. It's just we're going to have to start repeating some topics because we've covered so many topics. 173 different presentations are posted in the backlog of this Astro Imaging channel. So
Next
Thanks,
week I
guys.
have Filippo Bradascia from Prima Luce Lab from Italy. He's going to be talking about the Eagle 2 computer and some other products that he has. It's going to be an interesting presentation.
and the week after that, then I will be doing the one about flat fielding.
Yeah, that's true. It's better live.
What do you mean
Yeah,
it's better live? What do you mean it's better live, Sean?
David put in. He said I'd rather be watching it live. So yeah, so repeating episodes is good because people would rather be taking part in the episode rather than maybe just watching an old episode.
No. We're not talking about showing you videos
No, he's
that we've
saying
already shown you. You're saying,
No, he said he likes it. He would like it better if you did a new episode that you've already done because it's live.
okay, what I'm proposing is that we recover some topics we've already covered.
That's what he's saying. He likes it
Okay.
better because it's live.
Okay. Oh, well, I read his comment. Whose comment was that? It said, "I like it better when it's live." It's still going to be live. I mean, we're still going to be here. I read that as I like the open session where we can ask any question we want. I should remind you that you can actually, make any comments you want, even when you're not on topic. We'll try to answer them. We'll try to figure out a way to answer them. They may get a lower priority than the questions that are asked on topic, but you're always welcome to have your own little open session. Just ask your questions. Go for it. It's your conversation too. Just because you're not on the same topic as the presenter might be, that doesn't mean you can't talk. So.
Yeah, and a lot
Okay.
of presentations finish a little early, and we always have questions and answers about other topics.
Yeah.
All
Okay.
right, let's cut it there. I think we're a little over time anyway, and we'll save off the chat and.
And Adam, when you wake up from your cold, we hope that you listen to this and realize how much we miss you, and get well soon.
He's cooking food for Turkey Day.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thanks
Good
for
night.
watching. We're ending here. We'll talk to you all later.
Bye-bye.